I think solitary reading is about as bad an addiction as solitary drinking. One should drink with others, and one should read with others as well. Because you don't really find out what you've done with your mind unless you and somebody else, your wife or somebody else, your friends, have read the same book and you and they discuss it. The role of discussion, of conversation about serious matters, books read, discussed seriously and well, is the most fruitful of all the forms by which one grows up and one hopes becomes educated. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the Adab Book Club. We are back with the weekly Muqaddimah reading as we go through Ibn Khaldun's tremendous book, al-Muqaddimah, which so far has seen us discuss various topics from spirituality to the occult to merchant livelihood, how to be a merchant or how to pursue the treasures in the hidden realms. And now today we talk about something that is also very relevant to all of us as citizens and as members of society. Ibn Khaldun talks to us about the sedentary lifestyle, and some of the effects it has on the individual, in particular the man. Okay, so Ibn Khaldun, just as a quick recap, he is considered the father of sociology. In fact, he pioneered a certain science, unbeknown to those who came before him in the Islamic Arab Persianate realm, a science known as ilm al-Umran, something that he introduces in the Muqaddimah, and he makes it very clear that this is a pioneering piece of pioneering science that he hopes future generations can develop upon. Okay, so he gives the foundations. He says, I'll give you the foundations, but I cannot give you all the minutiae. That is for future generations to come, thinkers in the future to develop upon that. Okay, so in the spirit of that tradition, we're going to take these principles, and we're going to branch out, and we're going to apply them to the real world, inshallah. So he's known as the father of sociology, also one of the pioneering and one of the most influential economic theorists, which is why in the previous episode we discuss his economic theory in general terms. In future episodes we'll get into more detail, but he is also a very towering figure in the world of finance, economics, and state policy when it comes to financial management. So the Khaldun covers a lot. So here we're going to combine a few of those strands, and we're going to come to understand what he considers an ideal state for the individual in society and what is not an ideal state for the individual in society. None of this is personal, okay? Nobody should feel targeted or under attack. We are purely analyzing the world through the purview of Ibn Khaldun, according to his words. And we then look into those words, we contemplate, we exchange, we have discussions as we should have discussions, but it's never personal. Okay? Don't ever take this as a form of fatwa or some form of edict that this is how things should be. You should live your life this way. Ibn Khaldun himself, as I mentioned in the prior episode, is self-contradictory in many ways. He writes many things and then he himself contradicts those things. So don't take his words as a form of religion or religious order. It is just an opinion. These are opinions, these are foresights, these are studies, these are experiences that he's had in his day and age. So that's what it is. Don't take it to be a form of religious instruction or absolute statements. Okay, you can disagree. So Ibn Khaldun on the condition of sedentary man. Sedentary man. So sedentary society, sedentary civilization, Ibn Khaldun very early on in the Muqaddimah will introduce us to the 7 climes. Okay, so he gives us a very, very high level view of the world as it was. It's split into 4 quarters. One of the 4 quarters is actually inhabitable. And in that 1 quarter that is inhabitable, it is further divided into 7 zones. Okay, 7 zones. And if you go further, each zone has 10 different contiguous mini zones. So it's quite a very elaborate. So within the zones that are habitable, where there are civilizations, where there are human beings and cultures, he further divides those zones into 2 main categories. Al-Badawa and Al-Hadara. Al-Badawa is effectively what is in a translated version of the Muqaddimah is known as the Bedouin society. And al-Hadara this is where you would say the metropolis. This is where the city dwellers live. This is where civilization, craft, and sedentary lifestyle exists. So sedentary man is effectively the man of the people who live in cities or who live in regions of the world where there is culture, where there is civilization, where there is society, structured society. There's a government, there is order, and there is, you could say, also customary practices. Sedentary lifestyle is effectively a communal lifestyle that most of us will know of. The opposite to that is the Bedouin lifestyle. And Ibn Khaldun says these are the people who live outside the city walls, outside the city gates, okay? Outside the boundaries of civilization. And they live in the elements. Sometimes people read this and they have misconceptions because of the language. Ibn Khaldun, sometimes his work is difficult because he takes common words and he repurposes them without letting you know that he's repurposing them. So, for example, Asabiya, people take it to be Qawmiya. That's not what it means in his world. Al-Asabiya is something very different to that. Likewise, you also have the Bedouin. The Bedouin in his world is very different to how we would conceive of it to be. So when he says Bedouin society, he's talking about any society on earth that is not city dwelling, that is not within the confines of what we consider a society. These are people who live in the wilderness or who live away from the cities, and they oftentimes come into the cities to purchase what they need, and then they go back out. Okay, so for example, he considers some of the Russian tribes or those in the Caucasus regions as Bedouins. Okay? These would be considered Bedouins. Although they are not Bedouins, they're not Arabs, but Bedouin lifestyle is one such that would fit their category as well. When he says sedentary lifestyle, however, he's talking about us. Any society, and in the modern epoch, most human beings live in cities or aspire to live in cities, and this has never been the case in history. Most of the time in history, the majority of people lived in the outskirts. Okay, they lived in the villages, they lived in the rural areas. They didn't live in the cities. But in the modern era, following the industrial revolutions, people left what used to be the mainstay, the essence of what life used to be, and they came to the cities to work in the factories to seek a better life. So sedentary lifestyle has never been this prominent on Earth. We've never had a global culture where there are so many people living in cities and living a sedentary lifestyle. Okay, living a sedentary lifestyle, and that comes with a cost. Of course, it comes with a cost. Something that many sociologists have studied, continue to study, and inshallah we'll get a good glimpse of that through the worldview of Ibn Khaldun. So here we talk of those who live as Bedouins. They are more courageous than the sedentary people. Now, this encompasses many things, okay? It doesn't just mean courage in terms of physical courage. It encompasses many things, many traits, many attributes, okay? Nobility, for example, purity, chastity, simplicity, to be resilient, for example. All of these things, he talks about these later on as virtuous traits of those who don't live in cities. Okay, now of course it also has the opposite side of that coin, where he talks of the barbarity, the simplicity, and that's another side of their lifestyle. But in this section, he's praising them for that natural virtue. Whereas he looks at the other side of the equation, the sedentary people, and all of their ailments and sicknesses, the maladies that comes with living a sedentary lifestyle. Yeah. So he begins by saying that sedentary people have become used to laziness and ease. Sedentary people have become used to laziness and ease. Now, we all know modern lifestyles and modern living is given to leisure. It is often about how to make things as easy as possible. How do we automate things? How do we get things to be quicker, cheaper, faster, more convenient? How do we maximize our enjoyment in everything we do, from the food we eat to the experiences we have? We want to always maximize benefits, maximize enjoyment, maximize the amount of fun or the amount of leisure we have, but to minimize the cost of acquiring that, you could say, pleasure or leisure. So that gives a very lazy and a desire to always have things easy. And so he talks of laziness and ease. And we know, again, if you follow my stuff online, you will know I'm very much into the AI field. I'm following it very closely. And we're going leaps and bounds really in 2025 as countries and companies race to get the biggest and better, the best AI technology out there. And essentially what this is doing is it is taking sedentary lifestyle and it is putting it on steroids. Okay? If it wasn't bad enough already that we don't get enough exercise in terms of mental exercise, we don't think the way we should think, we don't memorize how we used to memorize, we don't have to rely upon our mental faculties to retain knowledge because it's all at the touch of a button. Now it will be even more difficult for the sedentary person to maintain these virtues. Okay, so for example, today there has been a headline that they've released or they're about to release the first AI assistant. The AI assistant is effectively going to make your life very much effectively you will have to do nothing for yourself. Okay, the AI agent will be your sidekick and will do everything you want it to do. So you never have to do anything else anymore. And this is something that will mark the beginning of another level of sedentary lifestyle that has not been seen before. And this will have impact on us. Let's take, for example, very minor AI technology that has been introduced in the last 3 to 4 years. Grammarly being one of those. Grammarly, is a simple AI that effectively corrects your writing, will correct your emails, your essays, your letters. It began as a very simple spell check, an assistant, and has now evolved in the course of 2 to 3 years to something far more than that. You know, Grammarly can actually write paragraphs, write articles for you, write letters, write notes, and it does so with prompts. So you no longer have to just type your original text, you can actually prompt it to write something original. So this takes us to a level of dependency on technology that has been unprecedented before. Another example is our use of computers and spell check and auto correct and auto fill. Previously in schools, children would have to write. They would have to learn the art of writing, pen and paper. Handwriting was a thing. Now those skills are being diminished, and we rely more and more on computing and computer kind of prompts to help us write. So this will weaken our skills as human beings and the generations to come when it comes to writing, for example. Our memory is also weaker. If you remember, if you lived before the internet or before the advent of social media or before especially smartphones, you may remember that in order for you to contact anyone by phone, you would have to keep a notebook. Okay, you'd have a phone book, literally a phone book. That's where the term comes from. People had phone books, little notebooks where they would write by hand people's numbers and names. And in fact, as a child, we memorized numbers anyway. We had them by heart. I knew my friends' numbers by heart. I didn't have to have a notebook. It was all in my brain. I just picked the phone up and I knew the number for my friends, several friends. We would also, all of us, have to memorize the numbers of relatives. Take it for example, if today somebody said to you, your phone has been lost and you have no contact or you're in the middle of a desert. There's a phone right here. It's not your phone, it's another phone with no numbers saved. You can call any number you like, anyone you like, okay, any relative you like, any friend you like, but it has to be from your memory. How many people could you contact based on your memory alone? How many people's numbers could you recall by memory? I'm talking about members of your family. I'm talking about very close friends, people you speak to and see every single day, right? Ask yourself that question. If the answer is none, really, you're over relying on technology. And this is very dangerous. This means your brain has become lazy. Your brain has become lazy. You depend entirely on a gadget to maintain this kind of vital information, essentially. So this is what he talks of when he says, when you're used to sedentary lifestyle, laziness becomes a factor in your life, okay? You become accustomed to ease, and that's not good. That's not good at all, you know? Things being, somebody said 911. Even that, if you think about it, is they made it easy. It's just 3 numbers, right? They made that easy for you as well. They should make it 91 to make it even easier. But now you just tell Siri to call 911 even easier. So as things get easier for us, it becomes more difficult for us to actually develop virtues and skills that we should have. So sedentary people are lazy people in essence. and accustomed to ease. That also brings about other problems. So for example, impatience. We become very impatient because we're used to things being done quickly. Something that would take hours to do normally, for example, to cook something, to prepare a meal, would take you hours, a proper meal. With sedentary lifestyle, we expect it to happen in a couple of minutes, sometimes seconds, if it's in a microwave, okay? And even with that, we are very impatient. If it takes you 5 minutes to prepare something with a fryer or microwave, you may be impatient just for 5 minutes. Whereas in reality, if you cooked it in the natural way, it could take you an hour. So patience is lost as a result of that. So he talks of this, and then he says, and I think personally, AI is the end of us. Okay? AI is the end of us because things are so easy that there is no need to try, really. Again, I have a huge interest in technology, especially AI, because it will define our reality. In the next 10, 15 years, it will define our everyday living. We need to understand this technology. But it is too easy, I have spent at least 10 years, investing money and time and effort just to learn photography, filmography, editing, graphic design. And I've considered that to be really a tremendous self-developing curve, that I learned something different and spent time to master the craft, every angle, every shot, every bit of light. Photography is very amazing. You learn about perspectives, you learn about light, the impact of light. With the right lighting, you get very different effects. The impact of timing. Every detail is very specific, and you get to master that. So you get to see the world as a photographer. Everything is art. Everything is art, you know. But with technology such as AI, that's no longer necessary. I can prompt in a couple of seconds and get the perfect images popping up, and then animate them with a couple of prompts after that. So what that leaves us with is nothing really to develop in ourselves. I don't have to try to learn about the techniques of lighting. For those of you who know about photography, there are various techniques. I mean, it's a science, it's a discipline. Even hours of the day, there are times in the day where it is the best time to take photographs and to film. It's known as the golden hour, the golden hour. Okay, so people used to go out in nature and they would know the golden hours between this time and this time, and I have to film quickly because the effect of the light on the camera lens at that time is unique. You can't replicate it necessarily with Photoshop. So people understood that, and there was something to look forward to. But now you just do it with a couple of prompts. So that means the art, the observational skills, the awareness that you have is completely unnecessary, and you lose that instinct. So that diminishes in us the skills. For example, when the Arabs were very, very well celebrated for their linguistic prowess. These were people who understood language very well, and they made use of it very well. However, as the empire, the Arabic dynasty, or the Arabic influence began to expand and grow, and new civilizations entered, new communities entered, there was an effect whereby even the Arabs began to lose their Arabic. Okay, even the Arabs began to lose their Arabic, and that was a major indicator that the civilization was weakening. The civilization was weakening. So there was an example where, depending on which story you hear, that Sayyidina Ali, or a man who lived at the time, Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, that he saw his daughter came to him and said to him, "How beautiful are the stars?" Okay, he said, "How beautiful are the stars?" And she said it in a way that it's either a question or it's a statement. How beautiful are the stars, depending on where you put the fath and dhamma. She got it wrong effectively. And so he was concerned. He was concerned. We are losing grasp of language. We're losing grasp of language because of the sedentary lifestyle. And we know sedentary lifestyle, city living, it corrupts language. Language becomes corrupted. So because of that, Sarf and Nahu was created to preserve these skills, to preserve, and we don't rely on computers for that. We want to maintain natural command of language. So this is what happens when you have sedentary lifestyle. It makes you lazy, okay? The Khaldun says it makes you lazy, and we know there are other problems that come with that laziness. So they are sunk in well-being and luxury. Again, the obsession with remaining youthful. So again, we know that one of the greatest obsessions in the world today is how to look beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, but more so how to remain young, youthful. Okay, I watched a news report last week about an influencer on TikTok who somehow has amassed 1 million followers and is influencing the influencers. She's influencing influencers, celebrities, because of a specific technique where she takes, I mean, some of these transformations online is literally sorcery. How they transform their faces with makeup and all types. And I was watching this, thinking that it was just makeup. It wasn't just makeup. She had tape. I mean, the sisters could perhaps they're experts in this a bit more than men. But people tape their faces. You know, they have tape that they tape around their cheekbones and they hide it with their hair. So it's an entire process that they go through to appear more youthful, right? And all of this is about well-being and luxury. Okay. Then you have the obsession with certain brands of products, very expensive jewelry, very expensive shoes, and people spend their entire lives amassing these things. They work for this, they live for this. This is what they aspire towards, wearing these brands, looking this way, having the latest cut. And so that's only possible if you live a sedentary lifestyle. That's only possible if you live a sedentary lifestyle. Oftentimes we used to joke when I was a bit, when I used to dress a certain way, we go through phases in life. There was a phase where it was external rather than internal. And I remember telling my friend, very close friend, that I'm going to go home. I'm going to replace all of my clothing with thobes. That's all it's going to be. Everything I have in my cupboard will be thobes. And I'm going to dress 24/7 that way. So I did that. I had a massive collection of them, different colors, different styles, different textures. And that was essentially something that became an obsession, following these trends, following these types of externalities. And then somebody said once in a lecture that the thobes that you wear, the brothers in the West or the brothers in cities who wear these long, beautiful thobes, they're beautiful thobes. I mean, it's nice to have a nice white thobe with matching kufi and maybe a scarf around it. Looks beautiful. But he said the Sahaba could never have dressed this way, the way you dress, because there were people who used to work in the land. They used to farm. That's how they made a living in Medina. They used to farm. They used to be involved in carrying things. They used to ride horses and donkeys. You can't ride a horse and a donkey with the beautiful, freshly ironed thobe from head to toe, because you won't have the mobility to do that with. And the brothers know if you try to walk or run with a long thobe, your footsteps are limited. So you can't live a life in the desert in that kind of dress. And indeed, if you look at the history, that came later. It came from the Persians. Okay, so these are things that the luxury, dressing for luxury, right? Not dressing for utility, as in you dress in a way that makes it more possible for you to farm and till the land. In the way you dress, it is specifically for the activities you're going to spend your day working on. Yeah, so if you look at those in certain countries to this very day, the way they dress is designed for the environment of work. Okay, how they dress specifically for work. But if you live in the sedentary lifestyle, your dress now becomes about luxury, about projecting images of being an image of prosperity, is about competing. So if you look at the way you dress, many of the items, as we say, accessories. We call them accessories, right? Because they're not necessities, they are accessories. Go and accessorize your wardrobe, right? So these are things that occupy the sedentary man and woman. And eventually what happens is they become vain. But also there's a change in the nature. The nature changes, okay? The nature begins to change. The way you think begins to change. So he goes on to explain this. He says, they have entrusted. So the reason for why they become lazy and they become slaves of comfort and convenience, and why they are obsessed with the externalities, with luxury, with well-being or youth, okay? Because Well-being doesn't mean health here. I mean, it means generally to appear youthful, to be vivacious, to be somebody who looks like, a bit younger than you are. The vanities of life. The reason why they are this way is because they don't have to do the real things that people do in the natural environments. Okay. When you are in nature or in natural surroundings, you are in survival mode. So you don't have time for these accessories. You have to always be vigilant. So he explains this. He says, us, for example, the city dwellers, have entrusted the defense of their property and their lives to the governor and ruler who rules them. So defense of property and defense of life for the vast majority of human beings who ever existed, this was the primary concern on a day-to-day basis. How do I remain alive and keep my family safe? And how do I maintain control of my property? This is why most societies operated on a tribal and clan structure. You needed that support system around you, and you would help fight on behalf of your clan to the death. Likewise, if you had problems, they'll come and defend you, whether right or wrong, because it was about survival, how to preserve your property and your life, and that of your women as well. Very important. But if you live in a state whereby this is no longer your responsibility, you have somebody else doing this for you, the governor or the ruler, the police force, the fire brigade, the emergency services. These are there to support you and to help you and to defend you. Then you entrust them with that fully. Of course, you become complacent. You're no longer somebody who is looking out for danger, who's ready to defend yourself and yours, who has to be fit and alert because you know it's only a phone call away. So he says, because they've entrusted this, the defense of property and life, to governors and to rulers who rule over them, and also to the militia, which has the task of guarding them. So in this case, because in that time they had police officers, by the way, at that time. He talks about this later on in the Muqaddimah. But essentially, there is a military or an armed security network in the nation or in the city that is there specifically to preserve, at least supposedly, to preserve and protect people, to serve and protect. This makes it easier for the majority of people in that city to let themselves go, okay? To entrust all of those responsibilities to the governor and to those guardians, the police or the military, the security guards. So they find full assurance of safety. There is no doubt in their mind that if something happens to me, I can call the police. Okay. There's no concern that if somebody enters my home uninvited, I may have to fight or I may have to. They have assurance that there is a police department. I can pick up my phone, as a brother said, 911, and somebody will be over in 10 minutes. So they have full assurance. They don't have to worry on a day-to-day basis. Is my clan strong enough to defend me if somebody attacks me? They don't have to worry about I'm living single as a single parent. Will I be able to defend my property by myself? They don't have to think about that. It's only a phone call away. So this real surrender, really is a surrender of personal, you could say, to rely upon yourself and those around you, is a weakness. It is a weakness because you find, as he says, full assurance of safety in the walls that surround them. So this was at a time when major cities or towns literally had walls around them, okay? Fortification. So there would be a wall surrounding the city or the town, and there would be moats or there'd be guards on the citadels. So hostile forces or enemies couldn't just enter. When people lived in that environment, and also animals, wild beasts couldn't enter, they found themselves in a bubble, and they found themselves in a state of comfort and ease because there's somebody there to look out for us. We don't have to fight, we don't have to defend anything. We can just relax and focus on other things, partying, competing when it comes to the enjoyment and stuff like that. Furthermore, he says, no noise disturbs them and no hunting occupies them. So there is a famous hadith that in Medina, one night, there was a tremendous noise, a terrifying noise that was heard. This was at night. So they heard a tremendous noise in the distance. And the companions began to strap up, okay, because these were men. The man wakes up, takes his sword, takes his arrows, he's ready to go out and confront whatever it is in the darkness. As they gathered, however, they were still concerned. They were worried because this noise was very scary. And so the companions at night gathered, and they could hear a horseman riding, okay, riding towards them from the darkness back to Medina, riding by himself towards them. And when that man came close, that horse rider came close, it was none other than Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So the companions were very, very impressed. They said, this man, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, two things. Harisun alaykum, as Allah describes in the Quran. He is very, very covetous, very, very concerned, very, very protective over you. Harisun alaykum bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim. So he was the one who took the first, before they could even leave their homes, he was already gone. He didn't wait, he went straight to confront the problem. And as he came back, he said, don't worry, it's nothing. He reassured them. So, but in traditional society or in traditional environments, if at night you hear noises, maybe an animal, maybe another tribe, another clan coming, that's a terrifying state to be in. The women and children automatically would be terrified, as the men, because now I'm being confronted in the middle of the night and I may not live to see them the next morning. So they would always be aware at night. They would always be alert of any noise that was happening at night, because that was always a sign of danger. But if you live in a city and there are walls and guards and there is a governor who looks after things, you never have to worry about that. Okay? You never have to, when you go to sleep at night, you never have to worry about that. Okay. Again, that will take away the natural instinct for a man to be alert and fit and ready to defend and to serve. That is now taken away. Furthermore, no hunting occupies them. Okay? So again, those who live in the Bedouin environments have to hunt. You become a hunter. Okay? It's part of the nature of living in those environments. You become a hunter. You become somebody who goes out to seek provisions with your own hands. You become a predator. Okay? You become somebody who goes and hunts. And when you live in a society where these things are done on your behalf and there is no need for you to be facing dangers or to busy yourself with security matters, you no longer have to hunt anymore. You no longer have to worry. This will be taken care of. Now the question may be, what's wrong with this, Ibn Khaldun? What's the problem with this? Certainly, we want to be in a city where we have peace and tranquility. Why is this a bad thing? It's a bad thing for many reasons. Because people who are used to so much luxury, so much comfort, they know, for example, somebody gets arrested for bad behavior in public. The first thing they say when the police arrive is, I know my rights. I know my rights. Okay, you see these videos all the time. I know my rights, officer. And they begin to confront because they have entitlement that nothing will happen to me. They feel so safe. Nothing will happen to me. Well, it depends on which category of which social class you belong to, right? But people generally are emboldened. They feel invincible. They're very entitled, and they lose sense of reality. Certain things that we say to police and people in authority in the West, you could never dream of in many countries outside the West. Just try those things outside. Okay? But it's possible in America, in the UK, in France. You see these people outside, the social justice warriors, the Twitter warriors, right? Is it because we have become so accustomed to this sense of security and entitlement that there is almost no fear. There is almost no fear of consequence. Okay? I speak to people all over the world, students, associates, friends, and the way people in the Muslim world in general, various countries, and this is something that I have myself witnessed and I continue to experience, they are more concerned about getting in trouble for saying the wrong thing, even online, than many of us living in the West. We couldn't care less, quite frankly. Yeah. We can go online, make fun of leaders or establishments and not feel any sense of fear, because there is a system around us that has told us that nothing will happen to you. Okay, you will be safe. You don't have to worry about any repercussions. And our children learn this very early on in life, that they can disrespect authority, or they can push the boundaries, and there is a sense of safety because you're a child. Okay? That's very dangerous, because in the real world, that is all just an illusion. In the real world, these boundaries do not exist. Okay? But we have seen that even the police that's put in charge to protect and serve and to preserve order has also been weakened. I don't know if you live in London or not, or any metropolitan region. The police itself is now embodying this spirit, and they have themselves become effectively, they've become a joke in the public eye. Okay? They have become a joke in the public eye. And so this is as a result of living an easy lifestyle for so long. Right? Living in an environment where your rights, your security has been promised and has been by and large guaranteed effectively. People grow a bit, you could say negligent, a bit entitled, and that can cause serious problems. People don't fear the police the way they should fear the police in the West. There's no fear whatsoever. That's because of the environment of safety, and that they haven't been exposed to the reality of having to defend yourself against aggression on a daily basis. And there's a sense of entitlement. I know my rights. Okay, I will complain. I will sue you. And so as a result of that, those city dwellers, they become carefree and trusting. But more importantly, Ibn Khaldun says, because they are carefree, they don't have to worry about self-preservation. They become trusting. The assumption is you can always pick a phone up and somebody will come to your rescue. As a result of that, they no longer carry weapons. They no longer carry weapons. Okay, this is important. This is very important. In an age where people, the greatest weapon you have is your finger, Twitter finger. That's the greatest weapon you have. Okay, Twitter fingers. But in traditional societies all over the world, up until very recently, carrying weapons, even if it was just for ornamental purposes, for decorative purposes, it was a part of a man's persona, public persona. You don't leave the house without that item. Okay? All over the world, all over the world. It was a part of a man's public persona, something that he would be reminded of, and also he would remind others of. It was a part of his accessory. But these traditions have, in certain places, been completely erased. This is why, for example, you have the term gentleman. Where does that term come from? The gentleman was a man in society. This is from the European society, who didn't carry weapons. He was known as a gentleman, a gentle man. He didn't carry weapons because all the other men had weapons. One form or the other were carrying weapons. And the man in society, for various reasons, either did not need to carry weapons or was known as a gentleman. It was an anomaly, effectively. It was an anomaly to the norm. So these traditions have been slowly taken away. People don't need to carry weapons, okay? They don't need to be battle ready. They don't need to defend the honor of their family, of their own lives, because there is a system around them that preserves these things for them. And so they become reliant upon these things and unable to defend themselves any further. Now, the problem with that is, again, and this is something that is oftentimes quoted, the American sci-fi or the sci-fi fictional author Robert Heinlein. He said, "An armed society is a polite society. An armed society is a polite society. Manners are good when one may have to back up his acts with his life." And this is something, again, we've seen in history. So, for example, you would have a gentleman's agreement, gentleman's agreement, which would be that if a man promises something, he would have to fulfill it, even if his life depended upon it. If he promised something, he would fulfill it, even if his life depends upon it. If you remember, if you've ever watched the westerns, the western wranglers, the old kind of cowboy films, you would see men meeting up at sunrise or sunset for a duel, Okay, these duels were between men who carried arms. This was part of their everyday experience. And if one man were to transgress or was to besmirch the honor and the integrity of another man, they would have to meet. The man would challenge him to a duel, and they would have to meet. And they would really go face to face, and only one of them would walk away intact. That was how much honor was valued. And in a society like that, you'd be very careful with how you speak to people, how you treat people, because your words and actions will have impacts, could even cost you your life. So in a society where people were armed, there was really generally people are more careful about not offending people's rights. So for example, if you think about these traditions here, we consider them conservative traditions or conservative societies. If you take, for example, the samurai code, okay? The samurai would rather die on his own sword if he lost a battle, if something happened that effectively tainted his image or his reputation. The samurai would fall upon his own sword. He would fall upon his own sword. Yeah? He'd rather die than to be humiliated or for his honor and integrity to be violated. Okay, so in those societies, people are very, very polite. The Japanese are still very polite people, although they're no longer walking around with katanas. They're very polite people. That's the custom of their tradition. Their society was such that how you speak to people, how you express yourself, costs you a lot. Likewise, many Arabian traditional societies, the Pashtun, the Circassians, the Caucasians, these were people who had very strict moral standards. I remember when I went to Hajj in 2011, I don't know for whatever reason, the Hajj group that I went with somehow managed to book us in with I think, Turkmenistan, the group coming from Turkmenistan. And so we were always in that group. And in Mina, or Muzdalifah, the tent we were staying in was right next to a tent with Turkmenistani, from Turkmenistan, basically. And most people were old. I noticed most of the people coming from Turkmenistan were old people. So one morning, I remember waking up very early, waiting for the bus to come to take us to Mina. And as I was sitting waiting for the bus to come, one of the men, Turkmenistani man, he walked past me. He said to me in Arabic, "How will Allah accept your Hajj?" He was angry at me for some reason. He began to say all types of things. How will Allah accept your Hajj, and how could this be acceptable? I said to him, "What's the matter?" The mere fact that I was facing the tent in which his group were in, including women, I couldn't see anyone. I could just see the tent. But the mere fact I was facing that direction was deeply offensive to him. Yeah. Just the mere fact I'm facing that direction, and these are old people, ajuza. I mean, what am I going to do with an ajuza? Right? But it was offensive to him. Right? So deeply offensive. So these are societies where you need to be very careful how you speak to people, especially female relatives. It's very common if you go to the Arab world, for example, certain parts of the Arab world, not all of them, but certain parts. You don't call a woman by her name, especially if you're not related to her. So, for example, your neighbor's wife, you would say Khalid, Fulan. Right? You don't call her by her name. If her name is Aisha, you'll never call her Aisha. Never. Right? Or your sister-in-law, never do you call her by her first name. She will never call you by your first name. It will be at a kunya, Abu or right? These are very sensitive things. My father-in-law, he spent many years in Saudi Arabia. He said to me once that he understood the culture. He said, it's like an arrow to the heart that you, as a man, would call a woman who's not related to you by blood or anything, maybe your brother's wife, maybe your neighbor's wife, by her first name. It's like an arrow to the heart. Yeah. Sometimes they don't even call her by Fulan. They would say, how's your family? The most general term possible they'd give, how is your family? Right? Because you don't want to offend the honor of that man. So these are things that are real. But they're in societies where men they carried things with them. But if we live in societies where, for example, then I go to Paris, I was born in France, and for the French, they know. How do you greet people? I went back to France when I was approximately 15 years old. And I remember I was shocked, appalled, how people greeted each other, men and women, complete strangers. They would hug and kiss on the cheek, sometimes on the, wallahi, I've seen it on the lips. They're not related or nothing. That's just how they would greet, man and woman, on the lips, kissing. Sometimes a man will come with his wife and his friend's wife, and they will swap and kiss the other person's wife. I couldn't believe it. That's customary there. It's not an honor thing. It's just the way they did it. That's how they greet each other. Right? But they don't carry weapons. They don't carry. Parisians are very known for being very, into the arts and into luxury and stuff like that. But these are customs where it costs you a life, quite frankly. So he says they don't carry weapons anymore. It's a sign of weakness. In the time of the Sahaba or the Tabi'in, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu became a Khalifa. We know he ruled for about 10 years, some of the best years in early Islam under the reign of Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq radiallahu anhu. Islam had spread, and so he went to visit some of his governors, and he had come to know through his informers that the governors in Damascus were living lavish lifestyles. They were building palaces. They had their own guards. They were wearing fine dress. They were eating fine food. And so they came and reported it to Sayyidina Umar. And so he had to go and visit. And he did this many times, by the way. He would visit his governors in person. He went to visit them. He got there and he saw them riding fine horses. Wonderful horses. These are like Ferraris today. Beautiful clothing. They looked tremendous, refined. These are men of high culture and class. And Sayyidina Umar is, if you know about his life, a tremendous human being. When he became Khalifa, he wore clothing that was tattered. And his daughter Hafsa said to him, Ya Abati, oh my father, change your attire because you have people coming from Rome and Persia, delegates coming to see the Amir al-Mu'mineen. And when they see you, we don't want them to see you this way. Change your attire, refine your clothing. His clothing had patches which he would sew, and he said, I will never leave the way of Muhammad and Abu Bakr. I would never leave the example he gave me. He was content with that lifestyle. So when he went to Damascus and he found the likes of Sayyidina Muawiyah and the others who were there with him, dressed really well, and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, to enter his domicile, his house, there were guards outside. Al-Haris, that was the specific rank, would be outside. He was shocked. He was shocked. And so Sayyidina Umar, somebody has the mic on. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he was then, he found where they were, hanging out, chilling. You could imagine these guys dressed in fine attire, riding amazing whips, right? And he's walking towards them. They don't realize what's coming their direction. They don't realize what's coming. Danger approaching, danger approaching. And so as he comes close to them, he begins to pick pebbles and he begins to pelt them. He picks pebbles as he's coming close to them and he pebbled them. Sayyidina Umar, I mean, his character is just amazing. There is, before I continue this story, there is an account, again, it's not hadith, it's an account, that one of the companions, after Umar died, anhu, he had a dream of him. He had a dream of Sayyidina Umar. And he said to Sayyidina Umar, how was death? How was the interrogation, Ya Umar? Sayyidina Umar said, well, the angels came and they asked me, Man Rabbuk? Who's your Lord? And I said, Allah. And then he said, I picked up rocks and I threw it at them. Yeah, I picked up rocks and I threw it at the angel. I said, who's your Lord now? Right? You tell me your Lord. In other words, don't interrogate me. Tell me who your Lord is. I want to find out if you're on right aqidah. So he picked up rocks, pebbles, and he was marching towards his men. And he began to pelt them. Why? Because he said, have you lost your rujula, your manhood? What is this? Where are your arms? And so the companions realized it's Umar. So they said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, calm down. And they lifted their garms, and there were swords underneath the garms. Said, we're still strapped and ready. Yeah. But because we live in a sedentary lifestyle, a sedentary culture, this is the only way that people will respect and honor us. We have to dress a certain way for them to respect and honor us. However, we are still men. That's why they lifted their arm, they lifted their arms, and there were swords, they were strapped. Yeah. So that was a sign of manhood, that you're always ready to defend. And so Umar, when he saw that, he was happy. He was content. He was content. Okay. So this is why Ibn Khaldun says here that beyond a certain point, these people, they are not armed anymore. They don't carry weapons. And that's not a good sign. We know what men carry these days. Man bags. The age of the metrosexuals. Men have accessories that women have. Right? These kind of bangles. These are women stuff. These are feminine, effeminate things. Look at this nail polish, right? These rings are women's rings. The entire couture of this is women's, right? The handbag. It's just even the glasses, the hairstyle, the earrings, right? They're feminine. And these are the sorts of styles that are being popularized for men. So now rather than carrying something, Mickey Mouse handbags, it's ridiculous, right? It's the opposite, right? But this is only possible if you're living a sedentary lifestyle. You don't find farmers and people living in those regions dressing this way. This is only possible as a result of living a sedentary lifestyle where you don't feel the need to be armed and dangerous. So he says successive generations then, they acquire this and they grow up this way. This is why you hear people from previous generations would say you have it too easy. In our day, right? Life is, you're too spoiled for choice. Things are too easy for you. In our day, it wasn't this way. But the generations that come after are accustomed to this. This is what is easy for them. Right? They're accustomed to this. An acquaintance once said that they went back home to Pakistan to visit their father's family. Okay, so this is after many years brought up in the West. For the first time, they went to Pakistan. I think she was 19. And she says, my wife's friend says, my father presented to us fresh milk, straight from the udders, fresh milk. And they couldn't drink it. She says, we couldn't drink it. Our stomach couldn't accept it. We couldn't drink the milk, right? This is as a result of a lifetime of processed milk. So when the real thing, pure, as Allah says in the Quran, fresh, pure, they couldn't drink it, right? Because a sedentary diet has basically made it impossible for them to consume that kind of natural product. So that's a result of being used to refined bread. It is said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Aisha radiallahu anha says, Rasulullah never ate to his fill, and he never ate refined bread. He never ate bread that was refined. If you look at the Quran, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam also makes a dua. And if you look at the tafsir of the dua, he talks about not praying against going astray or being destroyed. And they said to him, or the tafsir explains what he meant by that was people will be destroyed when they eat fine bread. Yeah. When they get used to eating fine bread, it's a sign of destruction. If you look at the bread we eat, it's white bread. It's a luxury that hitherto was unheard of. There are no grains. It's pure processed white bread. Unthinkable, right? They would eat really coarse bread. There was still grains in the bread. It was very hard. Right? It wasn't sweetened. It wasn't whitened. But luxuries cause a carefree, sometimes a very decadent lifestyle. And so they give up all these things because they're in a state of ease, tranquility, convenience, right? And children then grow up that way. Then he says, and this is where it comes to really crescendo effect, he says, as a result of that, they have become like women and children who depend upon the master of the house. They have become like women and children who depend upon the master of the house. Not to be, it's not an insult to women and children, but what it means is the men of that society have become so used to being taken care of, so used to being looked after, pampered. They don't look after their own safety and interest. They depend on somebody else to do it for them. They become entitled in that way. He says they become like women and children. They depend on their master of the house. Now, here's something interesting. Rabbul Bayt, or the Sayyid, as Sayyid, you know, in the generations before us, they would say, for example, somebody older than you would be known as Sidi. I have a family member, Sidi, Sidi. He's from like North Africa, Morocco, Sidi. But really is Sayyidi, my master, my lord. They would speak to their husbands, trigger warning. The wives would say to their husbands, Sayyidi, my master. It's in the Quran, by the way. Does anyone know where that is described in the Quran? A wife and a husband calling him Sayyidi. It's in the Quran. But the women who call their husband Sayyid, and in the Arabic, North African, I think Darija dialect, it would be Sidi. Sidi. Even now, amongst brothers, students of knowledge, we call ourselves Sidi. Sidi Fulan, Sidi Fulan, how are you? So, or Rabbul Bayt, yes, Surat Yusuf. That she found Sayyidaha lad al-Bab. That they found her Sayyid. Her husband, Allah didn't say her husband, he said her Sayyid was found outside the door. So the father, the provider, the protector of the house was known as the Sayyid, the master. The master. So the children and the wife and everybody in the house who depends on that man, he was their master. He was their Sayyid. And they would call him Sayyid. Furthermore, the children had also a hierarchy, whereby the younger children would call their elder brothers and siblings Sayyid, Sidi as well. So this was like something that was known at that time, Sayyid. So he says, that's why the word master is mentioned here, that when you as a man in society are used to having these luxuries where you don't have to defend yourself anymore, you don't have to be worried about these issues. You become like one of the children in the house or one of the women in the house. And your master is the government. You depend on your master to look after you. Right? Uh, there's a wonderful book, subhanallah, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Wonderful book, tremendous book. And Uncle Tom actually is not, he's the hero of the book. People who don't read the book oftentimes use it as a derogatory term, but he's actually the hero of the book. The real villains are the Sambo and Django. I think Django. Sambo is one of them, and the other one, I think Django something. They are the real Sambo and Tambo. They're the real villains in the story. His Uncle Tom is actually a good guy, but in Uncle Tom's Cabin, he sold a number of times. He sold a number of times. Sometimes he sold to cruel people, and at other times he goes to some nice people. Well, you call it nice, but nicer people. On one occasion, he was at a well-to-do man, a gentleman, or a man who had a lot of wealth and status, and he had kept many slaves. But in the way he kept his slaves, he was very generous with them. They were almost like relatives. So in his house, they would dress in his clothing. They would be so comfortable that they would dress in his clothes. They would eat at his table, and they would refuse orders. Right? So he was so, you could say, because he didn't believe. He didn't believe in this institution of slavery, and he would challenge it in the book. He would challenge it, although he owned slaves. He didn't believe in mistreating them. So in that house, he was the master, of course, but in that house, everybody underneath him was at ease. But when the man died and his wife took possession of the house and all the slaves, she began to turn the order. They became slaves again. She began to order that they be beaten when they made mistakes, or when they refused orders, they were beaten. They were stripped off the clothes and told to live outside the house. They could no longer eat the food that was prepared in the house, they had to eat outside the house. She made them slaves again. But the point being, the master made them comfortable. So Malcolm says, the field slave and the house slave. Why is the house slave not likely to revolt? In Malcolm's words. Does anyone want to share with us? Why is the house slave least likely to revolt? Somebody's talking. Somebody's talking. Bismillah. Brother Anas.
Because they're not capable of doing anything. They were being spoiled.
Exactly. Yeah. They're living a life of luxury. They were being taken care of. They were eating, you know. So they were in a state of relative ease because they're still slaves. But compared to the field slaves, Malcolm says, is catching hell. The field slave is catching hell. So any opportunity for him, he's ready to go. Okay. So Ibn Khaldun says that these people, because they live in the house and they have a master who looks after them, they become like women and children. Okay. They become dependent, overly dependent on the government, overly dependent on the boss at work, overly dependent on the local councillors, overly dependent on whoever is in charge for their livelihood, for their security, for the things that a man should be willing and able to pursue for himself. They become overly dependent, overly entitled. There are studies right now coming out about Generation Z, so not generation, they're not old enough, about Zoomers or Boomers. Zoomers come after millennials, and then you have Alpha. So Zoomers, 18, 19, just about entering the workforce. And they're still studying them because they're the next generation. They're the most entitled in the office. They are the ones who are effectively unable to commit to one or two ideas for more than a week or so. They have grand expectations, they don't commit, everything comes to them. And so the work ethic that maintained the previous generations is now being ditched. Okay, so they have become so comfortable, so entitled, that work is very different for them. The work ethic has changed, and that is very dangerous. That is very, very, very dangerous. To be that dependent and that blindly dependent is very dangerous. Ibn Khaldun says eventually, this has come to be a quality of character that replaces natural disposition. Subhanallah. So the fitrah is effectively impacted by this. The fitrah changes. He says eventually, it takes time. Eventually, this will override the natural disposition. The fitrah becomes affected by this. Yeah. And people suffer as a result of that. That's why he mentions the cycles of civilization. When you become too decadent, too absorbed by the superficial elements, too cowardly to do things for your own self, you will be devoured by those who actually still have grit and are willing to fight for things in life. You will be devoured. This brings to mind a very interesting ayah in the Quran. Banu Israel are mentioned so often because they are our cousin nation. And through their mistakes, we can redress our own mistakes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions when Sayyidina and Ibn Khaldun mentions them also in his Muqaddimah because they are an example of people who were so given to just being taken care of by Sayyidina Musa that they didn't want to do anything. They refused to fight. They refused to sacrifice. They just asked him every time, you do it, you do it, you do it. Okay. So, and those people will never attain the promised land because if you're not self-determinant, you depend on somebody else to do things for you. You don't deserve leadership. Allah left them like that for 40 years until those people died off. A new generation came up, were willing to fight, then Allah opened the floodgates for them. Yeah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed, He gave them in the middle of the desert. وَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَنَّ وَالسَّلْوَى. We have sent, we have revealed to you from the heavens nutrition. Manna wa salwa. Every single day, fresh replenishment would come down to them from heaven. And Allah said to them specifically, do not store anything because there's fresh supplies coming tomorrow. So they never had to work for their provisions. It was coming to them. Then they also asked for water in the desert. So Allah says to Sayyidina Musa, strike the rock and there will come from it 12 springs of water. قَدْ عَلِمَ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ مَشْرَبَهُمْ. Every one of these tribes will have a specific spring of water to drink from. So they have food and drink and supplies of water. That wasn't enough. So one day, these people who became used to luxury, they don't have to work for provisions anymore. They become used to this comfortable lifestyle. They began to complain. In Surah Baqarah, they say to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذ قلتم يا موسى يا موسى. They didn't say to him, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Sayyidina Musa, Ya Habibullah. No, Ya Musa, by his nickname. فَادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ. You make dua for us, not teach us to make dua or tell us how to make dua. No, you do it. Something as simple as making dua, they said, you do it, oh Musa, you do this. فَادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ. To your Lord, not our Lord, not our Allah, your Allah. You, Musa, make dua on our behalf to your Allah. فَادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ. يُخْرِجْ لَنَا. That he should now bring out for us. I mean, it's just entitlement upon entitlement upon entitlement in a very short space of time, because they were used to easy provisions. They lost the virtues of doing for themselves. And look at how they began to behave, how they began to speak arrogantly. فَادْعُ لَنَا. You make dua for us. رَبَّكَ, to your Lord. يخرج لنا مما تنبت الأرض من بقلها وكثائها وفومها وعدسها وبصلها. Subhanallah. And the entitlement that carries forward, because first of all, they're not willing to learn for themselves how to get these things. And in the way they demand it, it is almost a command to Sayyidina Musa. You do this on our behalf to your Lord, and this is what we want from the earth. We want this and this and this and this and this, literally. So at the time when Allah was giving them every single day, manna wa salwa from the heavens. From the heavens, food from heaven every single day. And water, they said, إذ قلتم يا موسى لن نصبر على طعام واحد. We will never be patient. We're sick and tired of one menu. Subhanallah. لن نصبر على طعام واحد. We won't be patient anymore with one type of food, one menu, one meal. فَادْعُ لَنَا رَبَّكَ يُخْرِجْ لَنَا. Let your Lord reveal or take out for us from the earth مِمَّا تُنْبِتُ الْأَرْض. And they began to itemize what they wanted. We want onions, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this. They named about 5 or 6 items, ingredients. So Sayyidina Musa said to them, أَتَسْتَبْدِلُونَ الَّذِي هُوَ أَدْنَى بِالَّذِي هُوَ خَيْرٌ. Are you going to replace what is effectively inferior? You're going to replace that for that which is superior, coming from heaven. Are you going to do that? Are you going to get to that level of real delusion, really? To the level of entitlement whereby even that which is superior, you have quality superior, you're going to replace it for something that is less than? He says to them, in that case, go back to where you came from. Go back to that Egypt where you used to be slaves. Go back to Egypt and find your shopping list there. So Allah says, then they were smitten with humiliation. Allah despised them. وَبَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ فَضُرِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَسْكَنَ. SubhanAllah, the ayah escapes me. Effectively, فَضُرِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَسْكَنَ. I'll come back to it, inshallah, when it comes back to my mind. But Allah mentioned that they were smitten by humiliation, and they will be oppressed, but more importantly that وَبَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Allah has become angry with them. Okay. All of this because one reason, they were used to a life of comfort. When it came to food, that was taken care of. They did not have to farm for the food. They didn't have to go out and hunt for the food. They didn't have to spend the money for the food. It came easily. And because it was so easy for them, and they knew this was guaranteed on a daily basis, they became carefree. And eventually they lost that privilege. Yeah, they lost that privilege. So this is a danger in having an easy life. We know that the Muslim community in the West, and I'll be very frank and open with you, we take a lot of things for granted. If you look at the way we speak about governments or authority figures, even in the masajid, or even our parents, we don't have respect for authority. We don't have respect for authority. We don't have respect for certain traditions either. Traditions are not respected because we live in a certain environment that makes it easy for us to lose sight of how important it is to maintain those etiquettes. There are no consequences for not having etiquettes in an environment where things are easy for you, for example. So that is something that eventually takes control of the person, and their fitra changes. The nature changes. The fitra changes because things are easy. Okay? So he mentions this not to praise that characteristic, but to highlight a sickness in the characteristic of people who live such easy lifestyles. You also find that they constantly complain, right? Because again, in the same way Banu Israel became accustomed to complaining about food. لن نصبر على طعام واحد. They began to complain about the food from heaven. And they spoke to their messenger in the way they spoke to him. That these are people who are constantly complaining. They have a long list of what they want. Okay, they have a long petition form for what they need. We want a righteous ruler. We want this. 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 But meanwhile, they're not willing to do anything to attain that. They're not willing to say, "Ya Musa, tell us how we can acquire. If we want extra ingredients, ask Allah to help us, or how can we make dua to Allah? Or where do we go to find this?" They didn't want to make any effort. They just had a long list of things they wanted, but no effort. Entitlement, effectively. Yeah, they become spoiled, like children in a house whose every need and demand is met. They become petulant, spoiled, capricious, right? And again, many people, not just Muslims, in the West in general, people are just entitled. Children don't have respect for elders, for teachers, for parents, for authority figures, because they know I'm a child in this society, and so no one can do anything to me. There are consequences for harming me or for holding me to account, right? There are human beings in society who do bad things, and they know the criminal system here is not very harsh. I won't lose a limb or lose a life if I commit a crime. Perhaps I'll just receive maybe community service and I'll come out of it in 2 or 3 weeks. So the consequences are very, very, very really negligible. And so people become very, very, again, the nature is effectively warped. Malcolm mentions, again, if you want peace and revolution, you won't have both. You won't have both. Because to create a society where everything has been restored, you have revolutionized the society, it's going to require something a bit different than just the peaceful means or the non-violent means. But when you're used to that, when your entire existence is basically a sedentary existence, you lose track of reality. You lose track of reality. And it becomes a part of the nature and disposition for those people. Now, on the other hand, Ibn Khaldun says the Bedouins, on the other hand, they live separate from the community. So they're not in the inner center of the city, of the metropolis. They are outside of that bubble. Okay. So in the modern setting, the community is the global community. Okay. The UN, for example. These organizations that if you are not part of it, you're not considered advanced, you're not considered developed, you're not considered civilized, you're considered developing, underdeveloped, and backwards. So these nations today that are not within the scope of these nations that are in the civilized camp, they are the Bedouin nations of the current age, and they live outside that infrastructure. Francis Fukuyama, he wrote a book, The End of History and the Last Man Standing. Yeah. A very interesting book, in which he talks of society reaching a peak, civilization reaching its peak, and there'll be very little left to uncover. We've reached peak levels of civilization. However, he says, the last man standing, there will always be a pocket of people in civilizations and nations that will live outside of this realm. And he mentions them by name. These are Muslim countries. He mentions them by name, saying that these nations will be impervious to the influence of Western democracy, will be impervious, will not be affected by this global culture. So they will be resilient and isolated, right, from these influences. If only he could see, well, he's still alive, he could see it for himself. He was wrong about those countries. He mentions a few names. I won't mention them here, but you can do the research. He mentions them there. So these are Bedouin nations. We still have them. In the 80s, because Fukuyama was involved in the American administration, he would identify, for example, Afghanistan and Iran as such nations. And at that time, also Saudi Arabia, at that time, again, people were militarized. These were warrior nations, warrior states. In Iran, in the 1970s and 1980s, in the 1980s really, during the Iraq-Iran war, there was a the Basij unit. And this is why Khomeini would oftentimes threaten Saddam and tell him, I have 1 million soldiers. Because essentially he had not only the army, the official guard, he had a civilian unit. And the masajid were converted into recruiting grounds, recruiting centers for warriors. So the Basij battalion was the civilian battalion. The civilians came to join the army. So it was a militarized society against Saddam. Amongst those who were being recruited were children. That's one example here. Okay. Were children and also elderly men. Ordinary people were joining the army. And so, because by necessity, if they did not defend Iran, they were at risk of being conquered. So they became, again, the Asabi was very strong in Iran, very strong. And they had to carry weapons. Okay. So that was an example of people going back to the elements of defense and being ready to fight, even the children, to preserve. But if you look at Iran today, things have developed. You know, people no longer carry weapons like this. There is an infrastructure. They have nuclear facilities. They have nuclear capacity, or at least they have capacity. Let's put it that way. And so the citizens have a different attitude. They want freedom. They want democracy now. They want to be free because they don't have the existential crisis they had in the 1980s when they were literally about to be invaded by. They were invaded by Saddam. Now there is ease of living in terms of security. There is an army, there's a police station, there are networks to preserve their safety. They're now concerned about other things, you know, being like the West, for example, freedom, democracy, so on and so forth. So in Bedouin societies, nothing is taken for granted. Nothing is taken for granted. They don't have official military. They don't have official police in the sense that you would have in, for example, New York or London, right? Everyone has to defend themselves in their clan. So they provide their own defense. And they do not entrust it to anyone. They don't rely upon anyone else to defend them. And they are ready to defend their own people and themselves. As a result of that, they always carry weapons. They always carry weapons. They are always aware of the possibility, the potential of somebody to cause a threat that they have to mitigate. And they don't entrust it. They're not going to wait for the police to arrive. They have to deal with matters as and when things erupt. So they watch carefully all sides of the road. This means in society, they're very careful in public, and they teach and train their family members, the children, the women, to be very careful in public, how you speak to people. Do not uh, besmirch the honor of somebody else, because that could cost us. It costs your life, and it could cost us our honor. So be careful how you speak to people outside, elders, strangers, women. Be very careful. They look on all sides of the road, physically but metaphorically. It means in public, they're very attentive. They're very observant. They stick to codes and conduct very strictly. They're very, very careful because they know, again, there are certain rules we cannot afford to break in society. Whereas the opposite happens when you live in a sedentary lifestyle, such as the one we live in, the very, very far left liberal lifestyles. There is no sanctity. Nothing is sacred. Everything is up for ridicule. You have the right to express yourself. The right to express yourself only exists when there is no right to arm yourself. the right to express yourself only exists and is only insisted upon when, as the author says here, society is polite when there are consequences for the actions and words. Okay, but because there are no consequences, we talk of the right to express yourself. You have the right to insult religion, for example. You have the right to insult certain communities, for example, because freedom of expression. That's only possible because you know there are police forces, there is a judicial system, there are certain infrastructures in place to protect you from the consequences of what you're about to say or do in public. But in these societies where such things don't exist, you have to be very careful of your surroundings, of your interactions, and how you address people. They also take hurried naps. So at night, as I said, at night in the daytime, they don't have the luxury of sleeping for too long. Because first of all, they're always working, they're always busy acquiring necessities in life, they're constantly exercising their faculties, but they're also always wary of being vulnerable. So long extended sleeps are things that are not necessarily taken for granted. So they take hurried naps, whether they're alone or whether they're on the saddle. So they're constantly on guard, constantly watching and aware and alert to danger. And also, he says they pay attention to every faint barking or noise. So again, they have very sensitive um, perception. They're watching. So in other words, these are people who nothing is taken for granted. Nothing is taken for granted because they understand that life is precious. The resources we acquire are precious and must therefore be guarded. But also the honor and dignity of human beings is also precious. So you will think 10 times before insulting someone's honor, before transgressing upon somebody's right, because there are consequences. They're very careful about these things. So as a result of that, fortitude, they are more resilient people, right? Has become a character and a quality of theirs. And also courage becomes a part of who they are. We've seen in the last 15 months, the courage, the resilience, the spirits of just indomitable spirits of the people of Gaza, because they live in an environment that demands that of them constantly. So as a result of that, they have grown. They've shown the world the resilience, the fortitude, the courage that they have in the face of insurmountable, almost insurmountable odds. They remain people who are courageous, steadfast, faithful. They don't complain, and they are very, very. Their honor is intact. Effectively, their honor is intact. They haven't degraded themselves before the world. So these are things that happen when you live in an environment where it's not sedentary. Okay, you have to fight for what you have, and also you have to preserve it. And nobody's coming to save you. That's another thing. No one's coming to save you. You have to be able to defend yourself and those around you. So at the end of all of this, Ibn Khaldun says, so exactly, so Hamas, for example, we can go on and speak about that later on. But again, when you are self-dependent, self-sufficient, things become more important to you and you develop new senses. So to say, when a person loses one faculty, for example, people who are blind physically, typically they have better hearing, right? You develop better hearing, better senses. You sharpen the other senses. When you lose luxury and comfort, you develop
Yeah, a little
other
bit, but
skills.
if you swap hands and stuff,
You develop other skills. Okay, you develop other skills because you are now in survival mode. When a person, for example, loses their job or their main source of income, they begin to value the little things. They begin to ration more. They begin to budget more. They understand the difference between something costing $5 or $4.50. They understand the difference there. They will look and measure more carefully when they're preparing meals because you've lost something of a luxury. You develop other skills, basically survival instincts in the kitchen, right? These are the sorts of things that people can only value when they've lost the luxuries that they're used to having in the first place. Yeah. So this is why Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu He would tell people, teach your children how to swim, how to ride horses, how to shoot arrows, and also ride without the saddle once in a while. When you ride horses, ride without a saddle. It's very painful, right? And when you walk, sometimes take your shoes off. Just walk with no shoes. Remind yourself of the elements. Don't be so detached from the elements that you're deluded about things. Sometimes enter the world, as the Imam Shafi'i says, uh, ما في المقام travel, safir, travel in the world, but also be estranged. Be strange, be a stranger somewhere, because you will become more in tune with not only yourself, but also you take things for granted oftentimes until they're taken away from you. This is why the traveler, his dua or her dua is more acceptable to Allah. Because when you travel outside your comfort zone in a new land, a new place, maybe the language is different, the food is different, you don't know anyone there, your senses are alert because you're in unfamiliar territories. You have to be more alert about everything. And you also notice things a lot more. You appreciate small gestures of kindness a lot more because you're in, you don't take things for granted, basically. So he mentions this and he says, ultimately, at the base of all of this is the fact that man is a child of the customs and the things he has been used to. He is not the product of his natural disposition and temperament. So this is where Ibn Khaldun becomes a sociologist. And he says, human beings are a product of the societies they live in. They are not necessarily the product of their natural disposition. So if you live in an area that is more sedentary, naturally you're going to become sedentary. Okay. And if you live in an environment that's more of the Bedouin natural lifestyle, eventually you will be accustomed to that as well. So you adapt to your environment, and that has an impact on who you are and also how you develop, even on a biological level. Because Ibn Khaldun says, for example, the inhabitants of zones 1 and zone 2, sub-Saharan Africa, who he describes as being uncivilized people, whose pigmentation is very dark, whose hair is very short because of the hot and arid region they live in. He says if these people leave this region and they travel to zones 6 and 7, up north in the cold regions of Europe, over time, he says, the skin will change complexion and they will begin to have blue eyes, blonde hair, freckles, and white skin. He literally believed that. Okay, so he believed that by moving regions, by moving environments, physically you also change. Over time, these people will change physically. Likewise, he says, those who live in those regions with blonde hair and blue eyes and freckles, that if they were to come and live in zones 1 and zone 2, over time, their descendants would also become dark and would also have curly hair and would also have black skin because the environment shapes who they are. Not only in terms of habits, but also in physical terms, it shapes who you are. And now we know that's incorrect, but this was how he believed things to be. So we, as Muslims who live in the West, those of us who live in, you could say, not just in the West, even in the East now, but we live in sedentary lifestyles, we are going to be impacted by that. Our level of courage, our level of resilience, our level of self-sufficiency is being impacted by this. There are many wealthy nations where the citizens receive every type of benefit and support, and there is very little left for them to do on their own. That is not really something that is good for the long term because it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem of how you look at life, what you expect from the world, and also how you navigate the world. Because a time may come when you lose all those privileges. So now what happens to you in that situation when everything's been taken away from you? You have no survival instincts. You don't know how to even cook an egg, right? These are things that have long-term effects on people. So it's important to connect to, as he mentions here, the Bedouin lifestyle. Our mother Aisha, radiallahu anha, she says, the first bid'ah in Islam was, can anyone take hazard a guess? She mentioned the first bid'ah in Islam, as in not in terms of worship, but just invention, or the first bid'ah in how the Muslims used to live. She says was a sieve, you know, the flour sieve. When you sieve the flour, she says that's the first bid'ah in Islam. It's not an act of worship, but what she meant was we began used to and accustomed to ease. The first sign of that was a sieve, when they introduced a sieve. It was a sign of ease. Now imagine all the you go to your kitchen, there are how many items there? Microwave, fridge, fryer, all types of contraptions and concoctions, tea, all types. Your life is very easy. You open your fridge. How many types of beverage do you have in your fridge? Fizzy drink, still drink. You've got a fruit juice. You've got all types of flavors. You have organic milk. You have soy milk. You have special barista milk. You have full fat milk. You have skimmed milk. You have semi-skimmed milk. I mean, imagine the types of milk, just the types of milk. Then you go into the water, still water, sparkling water, water from the highlands, right? All types of the varieties, all of this variety, all of this ease has an impact on us. You know, it has an impact on how we see the world, also how we go about resolving and facing challenges in the world, right? Are we the people who come to the table and we ask our leaders, how can we contribute to getting what we need to get, right? Yeah, Musa, how do we make that? What dua do we make? Where do we go? What prayer do we perform to get what we want? Or are we the people who come with a long list and we say, you go and do this so we can get this? And this is what we need: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Which category of people are we? Those who come seeking to support and to learn to do for ourselves and to contribute, or those who come who don't want to do anything but just want to dictate? We want this and this and this and this while we wait on the sideline. There we are. So that brings us to the end of this segment. Actually, not really. There are a few more things. So here we have, in the Muslim world, we've also come to the nature of certain Muslims has now become very material. And in fact, when we talk of luxury, globally speaking, even Westerners are rushing to the Muslim world, certain Muslim nations, because of the luxury, right? Certain brands are now embracing Arabic insignia and Arabic numerical figures, right, in their designs, incorporating in the designs. You have designer hijabs, right? You have Rolexes with Arabic figure. One of the most famous, or one of the most coveted, you can say face Rolex models are the ones with the Arabic numerics, right? Chocolates. You have the Dubai chocolates, like one of the most expensive, luxurious. People want this chocolate now. So it's also coming to the Muslim world. And this indulgence in this luxury has an impact. It's going to have an impact on the people, on their culture, and how they see the world, and how they also operate in the world. In the long term, they also are not products, because people think, well, we live in the Muslim world, it's never going to change. Even if we have luxury, we have principles. Ibn Khaldun says, no, you are subject to the things you are accustomed to. It's not about the nature or disposition that you have as a people, it's about the customs you embrace and the routine that you accept in your life that will determine you in the long term. So even though you may have a strong culture, in the long term, what you get accustomed to will determine your reality more than the culture that you're or the natural environment you're born in. Yeah. So effectively, nurture overrides nature. That's what effectively he's saying here. Nurture overrides nature. Yeah. Right, so I've spoken a bit. Let's have a bit of a discussion before we end today's discussion here. Does anyone have any commentary, any observation? Do you feel that we are sedentary in general terms? Do you feel that there are any advantages to being sedentary that maybe he wouldn't have known of? Or do you agree with his assessments on this topic?
Personally, I agree. And interestingly enough, when the Dajjal, the trial of the Dajjal, when he comes and he has this thing where he brings a wall of fire and a wall with like water, and it's beautiful and everything. And you think of the people at the time, what the Prophet ﷺ said, what will happen 3 years before he comes is famine, mass famine, all over the world. And really, if you think about it, resources will be so scarce, but we're dealing most likely at the time with a population that was used to that sedentary lifestyle. So most people will fall onto his side just by the fact that they see, oh, he has resources, oh, he's able to provide us with fresh water and meats and all kinds of luxuries that we were used to, so we will go to him. So a lot of people will just fall for that. And yeah, but I do think on the other side, if we were to just move and become nomads tomorrow, most people will also die from doing that, because most people aren't used to being a nomad yet. So I feel one thing is, how can we make ourselves more nomad-ish while we're living our sedentary lifestyles, so we can detach a bit from being sedentary, so that when we shift into being nomads again, it will be less, the change will be less harsh, or will be more able to resist it. And that's why Omar whose advice is very important when things up like eating less, traveling a lot, but being estranged. These things are things we're supposed to do while we are sedentary. The Prophet Muhammad used to go to the cave of Hira a lot while he was in Mecca, because you need to have that disconnect from the sedentary lifestyle every now and then. So yeah.
Brilliantly put. And even, let me ask you another question. I asked you the question earlier on, if you had your phone was lost, somebody gave you a blank phone with no numbers on it, and you have to dial the number of your closest relatives, could you recall the numbers by memory? Those of you who said yes, mashallah, tabarakallah, you are now amongst an elite few among the rest of us who would never be able to find the contacts because we don't, only 911. That's it. But that's a sign that we've become really overly dependent upon the mobile phone connecting us to other people. That's very dangerous. Yeah. The other thing is, if you were in a desert, I want you to imagine you're in a desert, or maybe you're in the wilderness somewhere, and you don't have a watch, you don't have a phone, a smartphone. Could you, in a space of 10 hours, you were there for 10 hours in the daytime, could you determine when it was time to pray Dhuhr? When it was time to pray Asr? Maghrib is quite obvious because we know it's shortly after the sunset. But Dhuhr and Asr, and Fajr is also quite obvious. But Dhuhr and Asr, could you determine without a watch, without a compass, first of all, the time for Dhuhr and the time for Asr, just by observing the sun and nature? Secondly, could you determine the direction of the Qibla, roughly, without a clock and without a... These are the sorts of things that show and will give us a bit of an insight as to, are we connected to nature? Are we connected to nature? Because those who came before us, they don't have these things. But they were able to tell, even if they were traveling, it's time for Asr now, or it's time for Dhuhr now. As I said, Maghrib is quite obvious. Fajr is quite obvious. If you have, for example, certain animals, they will begin to make noise right in the morning. But Dhuhr and Asr, that is where people had to exercise their knowledge of not only the religion, but also nature. Yeah. Does anyone know, how would you determine, for example, let's say Dhuhr, just by looking at the sun?
Well, if you know the zawal, when the sun is at its highest point, you can have an object there and measure its shadow. And once you know the sun has tilted a bit away, you can use the length of the shadow and the length of your own shadow, which is usually about 7 footsteps, to reach.
Twice as long.
And then you can also double that once you want to reach what is it, you want to differentiate the early times and the late times of Dhuhr and Asr. So for instance, the latter time for Asr will be twice your length shadow plus the object's length as well.
MashaAllah. So these people who survive in the desert, you see, these people who survive in the desert, mashallah, tabarakallah. Wonderful. As just also mentioned in the group. Really, if this is news to you, reconsider. Could I worship Allah in the desert? Could I worship Allah in the desert if there was no mobile phone, no watch, no direction? Could I worship Allah in the desert? That's really important, because as the brother mentioned, the shadow, right? You reach a point where I like to go into the wilderness with my children, and I like to explain to them, look, if you were ever to be stranded, you know when dhuhr happens, because first of all, the hour in which there's no shadow. So when the sun is right above your head, you don't have a shadow, right? So if you ever find that the sun always right, what's what I call midday, is above you, you will have no shadow. But as soon as the shadow begins to move, shift the other direction, and you begin to see that dhuhr has started, right? Now, when your shadow reaches one length, as in your whole body length, if you're 6 foot, it reaches about that length, Asr has begun. If you are from the other madhab, right? If from the Hanafi madhab, the first mithal or the first timing for Asr, the earliest timing has begun when your shadow is at least the same length, roughly, as you are. After the midday, Asr has begun. According to the Hanafis, I believe is the second mithal, right? So it's twice the length of your shadow of your body. Then it begins. And then, of course, sunset, we know. So that is how, without a watch, because oftentimes, for example, I find myself doing this as well. I know it's dhuhr, based on the sun and everything. I know it's dhuhr, but I'm looking at my phone for the alarm to go off. Even if it's 1 minute before the alarm goes off, in my mind, I'm telling myself, it's not yet dhuhr. But in reality, it is dhuhr. But I'm so reliant upon this piece of tech telling me that it's time for dhuhr, that if I pray 2 minutes earlier, I will consider it almost like invalid. Somebody say, oh, hey, dhuhr is 1:15. You prayed at 1:10. It's still valid at 1:10. If you know the signs are there, it's valid. But no, it's 1:15. No, you are so used to the mechanics of prayer, you've forgotten about the essence of it. You're relying on this technology to tell you when it's time to pray, when nature's telling you all around you, hey, it's time to pray. Right, so these are the things that the Bedouin would know. The Bedouin would know. They don't need a watch to know it's time to pray. They don't need to have a compass to know which direction to pray in, because they come equipped with that. So they become self-reliant. And other things. They see things. You know, if you, Ibn Khaldun says in the book that, in the Muqaddimah, in the same section, if you keep reading, it says, whenever you have a Bedouin and somebody from the city, they travel together, who relies on who for protection? You have somebody from the city and someone from the Bedouin lifestyle, and they're traveling together. In those days, they'll travel by caravan and by horse. Who do you think relies on who for protection in that situation?
The sea dweller would rely on the Bedouin because
Yeah,
he know better geography.
yeah, he knows. So you rely on him for navigation, but also for protection. Protection. This is why in 1258, when the Mongols came into Baghdad, Ibn Kathir writes about this. He says that the men would be subdued by the women from the Mongols. Because the women used to also, the entire tribe were warriors, men and women. And the women carried weapons. So he says they would tell a queue of Muslim men to wait while she goes back to her tent to pick up her axe and to come and finish that. And they would wait there. Right? So their nature was completely subdued. But that woman, in the nature she was in, she was a traveling warrior. She still had that instinct, and she was able to subdue men with that instinct. Yeah. So people who live, as our brother says here, that even in football, the children from the village or the farming kids typically dominate, right, in sports, because they come from the environments where, naturally speaking, they exercise a bit more, they're more resilient, and that is true, right? So this is what can result in living a very sedentary lifestyle, in that you lose connection with just basic things in life. Basic things in life, basic things. You lose touch of it. For example, another example is looking at food in your fridge, and you look at the expiry date. Yeah. My son, for example, one of my sons looks at the milk and said, Dad, the milk is off. I said, why is it off? Does it smell off? Does it look off? Does it taste off? He goes, no, but it says on this date it expires. Said to him, that's not the actual expiry date. It's an approximation. Yeah. The milk is fine. But you've been so accustomed to this type of lifestyle that for you, you can throw the milk away. It's perfectly fine. But because it says expires on the 30th of January, and today is the 31st of January, you would just throw it all away. Somebody living in a certain part of the world would never do that. Because, hey, it's still fine. You can still make use of this. But sedentary life will say to you, no, it's not important. It's now expired, throw it away. So it removes a lot of, we're not able to be appreciative of things in life. We don't have connection to nature. And also we can't read situations. We are not as aware of our surroundings, as he says. The Bedouin is always alert, always looking around, always alert to every sound, everything. They understand things. They can read people. They can read situations. They know when something is going bad, when to walk away. They can read things. But the sedentary person is blind in general terms. They don't know when they're in a position of danger, for example. They don't know when they meet somebody who they should respect. They don't know when they meet somebody who they should fear. Because for them, it's all about my rights. They are so deluded into thinking that I'm safe at all times that these basic instincts are lost altogether. And that's something, again, to be wary of. Very wary of that kind of stuff. Brother Anas.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
First of all, me personally grew up in village. I come in US in 2014. I was like 12, right? So I have a lot of habits. Since I was married, I would say, well, I've never spent and go out as much in my whole life. Like my marriage 1 year is equal to my whole life going out and eat. I never get like my dad will have even till now not more than 15 clothes his whole entire life. Even me, I never buy anything. And we, alhamdulillah, like we were able to buy house in cash the first 3 years we come to US. It was very surprising. My cousin who lived here, even till now, they're struggling. Like, I don't know, we have that habits, right? Our family, we don't go out, we don't buy stuff. There's one thing I just want to share. People from our villages, people from like the environments who come here, they were way more better off because of the lifestyle that they lives, right? Um, basically, we get to eat meats like probably twice a week when we were in the villages, And I personally know people who only get to eat meats in like Qurbani time, right? And another one I want to share is like, um, can we go back to the Bedouin life while we're in the sedentary? Yes. Me personally into sustainability. I've been studying on this field since I graduated from Darul. Yes, because of technology, advancement in farming have changed the whole dynamics of farming. Because now we have hydroponics, we have aeroponics, we have basically garden, you know, basically for when it's come to like electronic energy, anything that moves produce electronic, right? So you can get a wind turbines, you can get a solar system, you could get like basically sewing machines, which is like $200. It's very easy. You have a whole YouTube to go learn how to sew clothes. I used to sew my own clothes if I have a patches, right? These are very, very and we have a tradition in our families. If my clothes become a little bit like smaller than me, I will give it to my brother, right? And if we have a birth, new kids, we know how much money costs to raise kids, and especially in the Western country. What we will do is whole community will come and load you up with baby clothes, you know, and then basically we have that community, we have that tradition. So that's why a lot of us are like kind of we can survive. And every house you see has small little garden. Like we have grandmothers who will grow squashes, they will grow this and that. And I myself, alhamdulillah, working toward that self-sustainability. Now I'm working on hydroponics on my basement. I'm sitting right now working while listening to it, right? I never learned how to put a nail in a wall, but you just learn by doing it, right? And it is possible for us if we learn how to compost our own waste. chicken scrap. We can do meal. We can do actually. There's another even a vermin composting is possible. There's so many things. Farming have basically changed completely. It's not about touching the dirt anymore. It's all about calculations, understanding the biology, understanding the geography. Especially if you study the permaculture, you'll understand. Basically, you can plant and farm and grow anything in any place. It's possible for us to go back to basically those. Yes, my siblings are extremely spoiled. Certain thing they do, I will just look at them, and I will have a basically reflection on my childhoods, because if we do certain thing, we used to get beat up by my dad, and now they don't get punished. So they're very spoiled. They're very demanding, right? We will not dare to sit on a chair if somebody elderly is around us. If they sit on the ground, that's the adab that we have. That's basically, and if we see elderly person do something wrong, it's very disrespectful. We consider to go and correct him in public, in the front. We have like that levels of adab, and there's like basically I have seen in my own life. I'm 23 this year. How the generation after me had become spoiled. Like I was like, Allah, how are these kids gonna live if tomorrow if the government say, okay guys, we have this problem, salmonella contaminations, no food is gonna come to where I live, let's say, we all gonna starve and die. That's the qiyamah, that's the apocalypse. It was very, very surprising and scary. And yes, there's a way. There is a way. It's very easy. If you guys are interested, you can follow me on my YouTubes, where I do a lot of like, fun stuff. I just started, alhamdulillah, just to inspire people. I hope this is successful so I can literally teach basically the youngster. It can be a way for us to out of the 9 to 5s and build a community that go back to the, like Ansars are basically there are farmers, you know, get back to that lifestyle. That was my goal. Um, inshallah, make dua for me. That's all I want to share. I just want to share my personal experience.
Barakallahu feekum, and yes, do share the channel on the Telegram group, inshallah. It is a good thing because, even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was a child, they sent him to the Bedouins, right? To strengthen, not only to strengthen the language skill, because the Bedouins had the best language in terms of the fasaha. So to send the children there very young, but also to strengthen them physically, to live in that environment as children. So he was sent to Halima, a Saadiya, and spent many years there. That was also formative in terms of that's where his heart, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was cleansed the first time, right? In the desert. The aristocracy also had this tradition whereby they would raise their children here in the West, in the mansions and the manors. These were outside the cities. And then they would be sent across Europe to learn different languages. They would travel and they would acquire culture and a refined taste as a result of that. So this was a way of strengthening people. Today, we are so sedentary. Last week, for example, TikTok in America was banned for 24 hours. And if you look at the reactions of grown human beings, these are grown men and women who are having complete meltdowns, like petulant children, because TikTok was removed for 24 hours. It goes to show, if this is the reaction to TikTok being taken away for 24 hours, could you imagine electricity being taken away for 2 days? Could you imagine electricity being removed from these people for 2 or 3 days, or maybe, God forbid, a week? How will that society remain stable? The excess of luxury and ease and comfort is causing people to be ruined, because when and if eventually these things are taken away from them, they have no resilience. They don't have any sense of natural preservation. They won't be able to even cope with the pressure of not having, for example, electricity or internet access anymore. That's a real volatility, because look, nothing's guaranteed in life. An individual may at one point end up in a place where they have none of these security blankets, no security net, and now they're left to their own devices with nature. How do you survive? So these are things that are very important to, and you don't have to be fully, you don't have to start a garden, for example. You can do very simple things. For example, cook for yourself. Learn to cook basic meals. Don't rely entirely on Uber deliveries and ready-made meals. Learn to cook basic meals, basic nutrition, survival, right? How to do basic things. Learn to kind of fix, as the brother said, to fix your own clothes. To, if your bike breaks, something, basic things, just connect with nature, do things for yourself. And as AI becomes more and more and more and more a part of our lives, and we now have AI assistants, again, launched today, we have to resist. If we're intelligent, we resist being slaves of AI and tech. Resist. I don't use autocorrects. I don't use predictive texting. I want to write freehand because I want to maintain the literacy skills, the grammatical skills that I grew up with. I don't want a computer telling me how to write things grammatically and filling blanks for me. Because if it does that, eventually I will lose the ability for myself to write a coherent sentence. So you become really, rather than being more intelligent, you become the opposite of that. And one day when the spell check is no longer there, or you have to write something on paper, well, how do you turn the AI on a piece of paper? So these are the sorts of things that being a Bedouin doesn't necessarily mean you become a Bedouin in physical. What it means is, as Ibn Khaldun says, you learn to remain independent just in case. Just in case. This is one of the reasons why, for example, I found it very interesting actually when I read it many years ago. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam al-Ghazali, in his Ihya, he mentions many things. He says, one of the qualities of the angels that the angels have that human beings can possess. There are qualities angels have that human beings can possess. He mentions, but there are three things he mentions. He says, if a human being is able to control, number one, their appetite. If you can manage to control your appetite through fasting, ritual fasting, you begin to get closer to the angelic realms. Right? It's a form of self-control. Fasting is very powerful. Spiritually speaking, physiologically speaking, many ways very powerful, but it's a way of controlling your base desires. So it says controlling your appetite is one way. It's one of the secrets of raising up in that rank. The second thing is to control your sleep. Ibn Khaldun mentions they take very quick naps, they don't sleep for extended periods. If you can control your sleep, your sleeping patterns, another very powerful tool. The third thing he mentions is you can control your speech. Subhanallah. It's very, very difficult to control your speech. He says, one of angels do not speak, and say in Surah Maryam, we do not speak except by what Allah has commanded us. So their speech is precise and beneficial. They don't just speak for the sake of speaking. So he says, if you can maintain silence, is another spiritual exercise. It's a very powerful exercise. Some companions used to keep pebbles in their mouths. Some companions used to keep pebbles, one or two small pebbles in the mouth, in order to prevent them from speaking too much. They will keep one or two pebbles in their mouth because the fear of swallowing it. They will be cautious of speaking too much and unnecessarily. It's one of the secrets of being, in terms of remaining in control of yourself. What you eat, what you say, and of course, because when you go to sleep effectively, you are beyond faculty. You're no longer able to protect yourself. You're no longer aware of things. And sleep is very powerful. So if you can control and overcome your sleep, this is a way of fortifying yourself. If you can detach once in a while, from things that other people find hard to detach from, you can become, as people say, a digital nomad. That's another form of being a nomad. In this day and age, when everything is connected, you can be a digital nomad. That means, for example, between this hour and that hour of the day, or this day of the week, I won't be online. I can't do that. I can tell you that now. I won't be a nomad in that sense. But there are things you can switch off to regain control of yourself. You switch these things off to regain control over yourself. And also you begin to notice things, because if you're abstaining from certain things, you notice those things in other people a lot better. When you're fasting, you notice smells very easily. You notice food around you very easily, because that's what you deprive yourself of. So now you're more sensitive to that. When you exercise control over your tongue and what you say and how you say it when you speak, when you exercise that, you become more attentive to other people, and when they speak, you become more attentive to them. Yeah, these sorts of things. So it's interesting. I think if we challenge ourselves individually, can we be nomads? In what form can we be a nomad? To be a bit less sedentary. And the years coming ahead will be very difficult and challenging for us, because life is going to be really unbelievably easy and convenient with these very powerful modes of technology. We will have little to do effectively. And so in that time, the person who is the most, you could say, who's the less sedentary, who is able to operate beyond the system, who doesn't need a phone to know when it's time to pray or where to pray and stuff like that, that person will be a bit more difficult to rope in. You have more independence. You're not able to effectively, you can navigate outside this sedentary and effectively this hyper sedentary lifestyles we're living right now. But you can do more than just what is effectively in your pockets. Any final comments? I'm going to read the comments here. So go back to brick phones. Actually, Brother Abdullah, that's a very, very, very important thing. Some people go back to the brick phones. Before smartphones, we had brick phones. You only use it to make a phone call. That would save so many marriages, because so many people are hooked on certain things that they shouldn't be hooked on. And it's because of the phone. The discretion, just the access they have to the world. So without the phone, or maybe a phone that doesn't have that access, a lot of things can be resolved just by doing that. For example, detaching from that kind of harmful technology, many things can be resolved. Your nature, your fitrah, becomes restored, because that also programs your mind. We all know this common knowledge. What's up, Rahman? Sorry. So yeah, so these are things that you will see the impact by just remaining outside that system. Impact, you will see development.
Once your work is finished, don't watch the television. Once your work is finished, find something constructive to add to your mind. Have an hour for reading. And I don't mean read comic books. Read something that will make you know what's happening. So when you get in a conversation, you can sound intelligent, even if you aren't.